Check, check. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jose. Excellent. I guess I'm predictable that way. Yeah, for some reason the computer always tells me that my audio is not working, so I always ask. Um, but thank you for letting me know. Yeah, morning all. All right. So, okay, I've shared the screen, so we must begin the slides, which are here. So we're going to continue our discussion. Last time we talked a lot about different kinds of dualism. Today we're going to switch to physicalism. And I've got a couple more interesting thought experiments, which should be fun. So last time, let's get myself out of the way here. Just recall, last time we discussed two different forms of dualism. One of those was substance dualism. So recall on substance dualism, like the substance dualism of Rene Descartes, for example, there are two different kinds of substance. There are fundamentally two different kinds of things. There's physical things and mental things. There's matter and mind. Descartes called matter res extensa. That's Latin for extended substance. It's extended, it takes up space, it has mass and so forth. And res cogitans for mind, or thinking substance. That's one kind of dualism. The idea that there are these two substances, and somehow they've got to interact, but we don't exactly know how, right? That's the mind-body interaction problem. And that's been the biggest problem for substance dualism through all these years. How does an immaterial substance like mind interact with a material substance like a physical body, and vice versa? Descartes thought it happened in the pineal gland, in the brain, but Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, as we saw last time, thought that, well, that doesn't really make any sense, and Descartes still had some explaining to do. Most dualists today, though, are not substance dualists. They're property dualists. So they're physicalists, really, in the sense that there is one kind of substance. There is only physical substance, but there's two different kinds of properties. We can have physical properties and we can have mental properties. How do we get mental properties? Well, our matter has to be arranged or organized in the right kind of way. So not just any matter can have mental properties, but special arrangements of matter can have mental properties, like brains, for example. So that's property dualism, right? So my brain might have the physical property of having, to use the shop-worn example, my C fibers firing. But the mental property would be my being in pain. Those would be two different properties, one mental, one physical, both occurring in the same physical substance, the neurons in my brain. So that's the recap for dualism. And today I want to talk about physicalism. So recall, physicalism says that everything that exists is physical. It's matter, it's energy. That's what really exists. And as we'll see as we get to the end of today's lecture, there is one variety of physicalism called eliminativism, which says that mental talk doesn't really refer to anything real. When I talk about beliefs, desires, and other propositional attitudes, I'm not referring to anything real. But most physicalists, oh, there's a typo there. Most physicalists do think that our mental talk does refer to real things. Um, so when sure, I might think that, well, what's really real is physical stuff, matter and energy. Um, but I can still talk about beliefs and desires and other propositional attitudes, for example. I can still do that. Those still refer to real things. Um, and there are a couple different kinds of physicalism too. We've got reductive and non-reductive physicalism. Some varieties of physicalism reduce the mental to the physical, and some varieties do not. So why don't we start with reductive physicalism? Glad to be straightforward. Um, right now, oh, that's a good question. Well, I see them as pretty closely related to one another. Why? Well, the word physicalism is cognate with physical, physics, and so forth. And these words just come from the Greek physis, which means nature. So um, I guess I don't really see a too big of a difference between these two terms, right? On naturalism, the only things that exist are natural things, and those are also physical things. Um, right? On if you're a naturalist, you deny the existence. You either well, there's a few different kinds, right? There's metaphysical naturalism or ontological naturalism, where you would deny the existence of anything supernatural, um, God or gods, ghosts, um, psychic powers, right? Those would all be supernatural. You would just deny that those exist. And as a consequence of that, you'd probably be a physicalist. The only things that do exist are, physical things. Um, um, you could be a methodological naturalist, and you might say, well, uh, maybe there are supernatural things, but science can't study those. Science only studies natural things, right? So I don't see a huge difference. I guess metaphysical naturalism is a lot like metaphysical physicalism. That's a mouthful. But you could be a methodological naturalist and not be a physicalist. Uh, so in other words, you might not deny that supernatural things exist, but you might still say that, well, science can only study the physical or the natural. There are like theistic scientists like that, right? Um, but I don't see a huge difference between the positions. Um, yeah, Christian reductive physicalism, I think, is pretty straightforward. Um, what it means is, what reductionists want to do is simplify, right? They don't want to eliminate; they want to simplify. Um, I'll try to explain what I mean here, right? On one particular version, the mind just is the brain. Mental states just are brain states. So we call this type identity theory. So we say identity theory because what we're doing is identifying mental states with brain states. And we throw the word type in there because each type of mental state is really a type of brain state. For example, say I have the belief that Ottawa is the capital of Canada. On type identity theory, if you also believe that Ottawa is the capital of Canada, we have the same type of brain state that realizes that mental state. So, I'm going to use my whiteboard today. I've got this office now and I got this whiteboard and I've never used it. So maybe what we could do is say, if we're type identity theorists, let's see. Type identity. It's hard to see that, isn't it? Where else can I write? Maybe here. Okay, so here we could just say that mental state, let's call that M A, mental state A. Oh, you can't see anything, can you? Oh, that's disappointing. Well, here, I'll just show you. So you could say, ooh, oh, it's backwards. Well, it looks backwards to me. Hopefully it doesn't look backwards to you. But you would just say that mental state A is equivalent to brain state B. Mental state B is equivalent to brain state B. Sorry, I wrote A there. It should say brain state B. So my belief in Ottawa is just a type of brain state where my neurons are firing in a particular way. Likewise with you. Being in pain is identical to a brain state where my C fibers are firing, perhaps. And that's it. Types of mental states are identified with types of brain states. Oh, good. Yeah, the whiteboard is bright. I can't even close my curtains either because the curtains are broken in here. But at least it's not backwards. Okay, so maybe I can't rely on this whiteboard very much, but I'll whatever. I'll give you guys the close up angles. So that's type identity theory. On type identity theory, we've got two ways of talking about the same thing. We've got our common sense vernacular, of folk vernacular, if you like. Sometimes this is called folk psychology. And this includes all of our talk about beliefs and desires. And we also have our neuroscientific vocabulary, right? I can say like, oh, I'm seeing the color red right now. That's my everyday vernacular. Or I could say, oh, the neurons in my primary visual area are firing at such and such a frequency. That's the neuroscientific thing. But we're talking about the same thing, really, on type identity theory. And the idea is that as we learn more about the brain and the mind, we can eventually replace our everyday vernacular with scientific vernacular. We could replace a common sense theory with a scientific theory, and we wouldn't be losing anything in the process. We wouldn't be losing any explanatory power in the process. And that is why this is a type of reductive physicalism. What we're doing is reducing beliefs and desires and all the other mental states to brain states. We don't lose the ability to explain anything. In fact, what we're doing is trying to simplify things. So just because we haven't really talked a whole lot about types and tokens just yet, I want to make sure that everybody understands what I mean when I talk about a type versus a token, because it's going to be important later. Think back to our lecture on universals and also the lecture on particulars. Universals are kind of like types. Again, not exactly, but you can think of a type as a kind or a category, right? So human is a type. What else? What else? What are some other types? I don't know. Cars. Cars are a type of thing, right? And I am a token of a type. I am a particular human. the is there a car out the window I can look at? No, no. But if there were a car parked out there, that would be a token of a type. Everybody see what I mean there? So the reason why I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this, okay, like object-oriented programming. Yeah. Yeah, Ryan, exactly. That's exactly right. That's what they're saying. And that's why I want to really hammer this point home. So for those who are still not clear, so a token is like a particular example of a type of thing, right? So so I am a token of a type of being called a human. And so are all of you. We are all particulars, particular examples of the kind of thing that we call a human being. What else? Computer. Computer is a type of artifact. And the computer I'm using right now is a token of that type. What else? What else? What else? What else? Well, dog. Dog is a type. My dog who's probably at home chilling out with my partner right now, is a token of a type. And it's a different tokening of the type dog than your dog is, perhaps, if you have a dog. Right? So that's the idea. And so that means, as Ryan said a moment ago here in the chat, on type identity theory, if I'm in pain and you're in pain, that means we share the same type of brain state. It means that we would have the same mental state. Everybody clear on that now? Okay, good. Everyone else good? Hope so. If it's still not clear yet, it should become clear as we continue our discussion. Especially like down the road, we'll get to token identity theory, which will also help us to unpack some of these differences. Not on type identity theory. So this is a really good point. On token identity theory, this would be true. Like, if I'm in pain, my brain, my brain is wired up differently. My brain is firing differently than your brain. So in that case, you and I would each have our own token of the type of brain state that is being in pain. But so that's token identity theory, not type identity theory. So what motivates this? What kind of evidence do thinkers invoke for identity theory? Well, on the scientific side of things, it's been apparent for a long time that people with damage to specific areas of the brain tend to develop specific cognitive or perceptual deficits. And there are a few famous examples of this from the medical literature that we can go through now briefly. One, I believe I've mentioned before, is Phineas Gage. Have I mentioned Phineas Gage before? Maybe somebody can remind me. Okay, perfect. I have. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah. Phineas Gage is the individual who was the railway worker who, in the 19th century, he had that big old tamping iron blown through his skull. And he survived, but his personality changed because there were changes in his brain. His dorsolateral prefrontal cortex was severely damaged, and that resulted in Gage going from this sort of friendly Ned Flanders sort of character to a grumpy sort of fellow who would drink and curse and do all of these things that he never used to do. So there were personality changes for Gage and changes in behavior. following his injury. Another famous example is Dr. Paul Broca's patient Tom, which I will here. Actually, I'll spell that. I can't put the accent, or can I? I don't know if my keyboard will allow me to do that, but I don't know the word. But you know how in French, oh, I can draw it on the whiteboard. Just got to get that close, the whiteboard closed up. So it has that little accent, right? You know, that little hat that letters have sometimes. I don't know what it's called in French, but that little diacritical mark there. So he had this patient, Paul Broca's, a 19th century neuroscience, had this patient who had a massive stroke in this area of the brain, um, which we now call Broca's area, and it's on the it's in the left on the left, kind of like right around here. So right around the this would be this would be in the kind of around the temporal area. Temporal area is here, parietals up here, frontal, occipital. And this resulted in severe deficits for his patient. His patient was anonymized as ton because that was the only syllable he could utter following his stroke. So this is Broca's aphasia. And we name this area Broca's area now in the brain. And there are various degrees of severity, but if you have damage to this area of the brain and you develop Broca's aphasia, what you have trouble with is speech outputs. You know, and Ton's injuries were so severe that he could only utter one syllable. Even though he could understand what was being said to him, he couldn't respond in full sentences anymore. It's a bit like, have any of you seen Game of Thrones? That show Game of Thrones with all the dragons and everything. Anna hasn't, but a few of you has. So Hodor. If you think of Broca's aphasia, think of the character Hodor, right? That's all he says. I know. I'm no spoilers, but it's Hodor's story is very sad, I think. No, but I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it. But yeah, think of Hodor when you think of Broca's aphasia. That would be what a severe case would really be like. So yeah, there's lots of examples like that where you know, damage to a specific area results in very particular cognitive or perceptual deficits. No, but he would have been able to read it. Yeah, it's really interesting. Broca's area seems to be important for linearizing motor outputs, not just for speech, but for but even for things like counting. So Tom wouldn't have been able to count out loud to 10. He would have just been like Tom, 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 you know. Even music, even playing a musical instrument recruits Broca's area. And there's another area called Wernicke's area, which is about speech inputs. And you can, if you have damage to that area, you can get Wernicke's aphasia. So it's kind of similar to Broca's aphasia, but it's with stuff coming, with the information coming in as opposed to information going out, right? And this is how we figured out how the brain works, by the way, and the history of neurology and functional neuroscience and all of that. We would study people with brain injuries and try and find what we call a double dissociation of function. So if we have an injury to a particular area, like say Broca's area, we have an injury to Broca's area. What we have is a deficit in speech outputs, not inputs. But Wernicke's area, is damaged and Broca's area isn't, the problem has to do with inputs, not outputs. So it's a double dissociation of function. And by looking at all kinds of brain injuries and by doing some lesion studies on non-human animals, which are kind of nasty, we've learned which areas of the brain do what. So that's the motivation for identity theory when it comes to lines of scientific evidence. We know that when changes to specific areas of the brain happen, very specific changes in thinking or perception or behavior will occur. So that gives us some reason to think that mental states are identical to brain states. But on the philosophical side of things, there are a couple of arguments that are important as well. And one is that the world, if the world is only physical, then it's just ontologically simpler than a world made of two different kinds of substances or with two different kinds of properties. So I mean simpler in the sense, simpler in like the Occam's razor sense, right? It's just simpler ontologically if the world is just physical stuff as opposed to physical and non-physical stuff. Just simpler. So we should not multiply entities beyond necessity. We should not posit immaterial substances or mental properties. That is what a reductive physicalist would say. They would say, hey, I'm just following Occam's razor here. And that kind of leads to the second reason, which is also related a bit to the first point I made about lines of scientific evidence. Science is very successful. Science explains more and more about the physical world every day. But if dualism were true, then science wouldn't be able to explain the mental because either the mental is some kind of non-physical immaterial substance, which science can't study, or it's just mental properties. And again, science can't study mental properties. Science studies what is physical, what is natural. So on the one hand, if dualism is true, we wouldn't be able to explain it. But on the other hand, given how successful science has been at explaining the world, we should expect that one day we'll be able to explain the mental scientifically, perhaps by reducing it to the physical. So it's reasonable to believe that physicalism is the right metaphysical theory, right? How could a dualist respond to this? Oh, there's a couple of ways. A dualist might say, hey, hang on, Mr. Identity Theorist. Identity theory makes very strong claims. Identity claims are very strong claims. We could easily falsify them by showing that there is a difference between the two things that we identify as one thing. So if we could show that this applies to minds, that something applies to minds but not bodies, or something applies to bodies but not minds, we could falsify type identity theory. See, when you say a strong claim, that might sound good at first, like, oh, a strong claim, good. The claim is nice and strong. That's a good thing. Well, a strong claim is a very big, sweeping claim, which means that it's easy to refute, right? Imagine if I make the claim that all swans are white. I've looked at all of the swans in Ottawa, counted them all up. They've all been white. All their feathers are white. So all swans are white is a strong claim because it would only take one swan of a different color, like a black swan, to falsify that claim. We could do something similar here. If we can show that minds have some property or characteristic that bodies don't, or vice versa, that would falsify type identity theory. Mental states may have things that bodies don't, right? Remember last time we talked about how mental states have intentionality. They have content. They're about things. Physical objects are not. Phenomenology Brains have phenomenology. There's something that it's like to have a mind. There's not something that it's like to be a rock, right? Um, so what else? What else? Well, bodies have characteristics that minds lack. Bodies take up space. Um, Somebody like Rene Descartes would say that minds do not take up space. Minds are unextended while bodies are extended. So maybe we can falsify type identity theory by searching for these things that either minds or bodies aren't supposed to have and showing that they have them. Then again, a physicalist might respond by saying, well, maybe one day we'll be able to explain intentionality and phenomenology physically or naturalistically. Maybe we just can't do it yet. So that's reductive physicalism. There's also non-reductive physicalism. So this is where we do not reduce the mental to the physical. We still perhaps identify one with the other, but we don't reduce anything. I mean, and this is motivated by some of the limits of type identity theory. Type identity theory seems to limit mental states to humans. Can you see why? Anyone want to volunteer in the chat? If we're talking about types of mental states, why is it chauvinistic? Why is it human chauvinistic? If you've got an idea about why, volunteer it in the chat. And if not, I'll step in and explain it. Yeah, but what's behind that assumption? No, it lies. Here's a clue. It lies in the identity claim, right? If we're identifying mental states with types of brain states. Well, you guys are all pretty close. If I identify the mental state of being in pain with C fibers firing, so the type of mental state being in pain is identical to the brain state where your C fibers are firing, I'm clearly talking about human brains. I'm saying that's the type of mental state that this is. It's a human brain state. So, of course, that rules out non-human animals having mental states. But clearly, non-human animals do have mental states. There might be extraterrestrial alien creatures out there with very different physiology than we have. But we wouldn't deny if they behaved intelligently that they have mental states. It's also possible that a sophisticated enough computer or a robot could maybe possess mental states, right? I mean, think of the robots from Star Wars or Mr. Data from Star Trek, right? These are robots or androids that are incredibly sophisticated and which arguably possess mental states. I mean, think of R2-D2 and C3PO from Star Wars, right? Clearly, they have mental states. C3PO is always worried about something. He's a very neurotic robot, but he's always like, something bad's going to happen. Whereas R2-D2 is always charging ahead and he's not worried about anything. And he just makes his beeps and boops and yeah, clearly we can attribute mental states to these robots. We attribute mental states to our pets, right? Type identity theory seems to leave this out. And Jose has a good point here. The moment we have a distinction like that, it can be right for racism and discrimination too. You can claim that certain people don't have mental states either. Yeah, I see a worry like this arising out of denying that animals have mental states. If you deny that animals have mental states, you're denying that um, they can feel, things like pain or pleasure, and thus that maybe they aren't deserving of rights or legal protections. And of course, that's the move that happens in certain forms of discrimination, where we dehumanize other people, right? We say that people, the such and such group of people is more like animals than humans, right? We're othering them. We're dehumanizing them. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That is a big worry. That is related to what we're discussing today. So the idea here in non-reductive physicalism is that we can't reduce types of mental states to types of brain states. We'll call this the oh, there's a typo there. It's supposed to say multiple. The multiple realizability objection. It goes like this. Mental states can be realized or implemented by many different kinds of brain states, maybe even by many different types of physical substrates. So this is called functionalism. A lot of physicalists are not type identity theorists. They're actually functionalism. And on functionalism, what is important is the function or the functional role of the mental state. Oh, there's another typo. Oh, I should have really looked these slides over. Mental states are defined in terms of their functional roles, not the substrate by which they are implemented. This means that minds are multiply realizable. So let's unpack that a little bit. I'll use this the old pain C fiber example again, right? So identity theory would make a claim, type identity theory would make the claim that there is a type of mental state, being in pain, which is identical to a type of brain state where your C fibers fire. C fibers are a type of unmyelinated neuron that fires when we're in pain. Now, a functionalist is going to say, well, hang on. Is that really one type of state? Is my being in pain the same type of brain state as your brain state is when you're in pain? We're all wired up a little bit differently, right? If you look at the connections, the neuronal connections throughout our brains and central nervous system, mine's going to look different than yours, right? So maybe my pain is C fibers firing, but the pattern of activity in my brain and nervous system is going to look different than it does in yours. Moreover, maybe pain can be realized with different physical substrates. So, for example, animals can clearly experience pain, but animals have different brains and nervous systems than we do. We don't want to deny that they can experience pain. Obviously, animals do seem to experience pain, but because their brains and nervous systems are different, the same mental state, being in pain, can be realized by different states in different brains and nervous systems. Or imagine that there are aliens and they have a very different physiology than we do. Not really. It's not really a response to that claim. Functionalism is just shifting the emphasis from what the brain is made of to the relationship between all of the different mental states that there could be. So to continue, if if there were aliens out there that had very, very different physiology, they might not have C fibers, right? They could be very different, completely different biology, and their pain is realized via their X particles instead of their C fibers or something, right? So we wouldn't want to deny that an alien going ouch, or the alien equivalent, is experiencing pain. What matters is not how the pain is realized. The physical implementation doesn't matter. What matters is the functional role that pain plays. You know, pain makes you say ouch. Pain makes you withdraw whatever part of your body the injury is on away from the painful stimulus. Pain might being in pain might lead to other mental states like regret. Like, oh, I wish I hadn't touched that sharp object. Or anger. If someone else has caused you the pain, you might become angry at them, right? Like, imagine if you know, somebody punches you in the face or something. It hurts. And you might want to retaliate. So you'd become angry. That's how we understand pain, not the physical substrate that implements the pain. We understand pain as a mental state that has a particular functional role in the mental system. So that's what functionalism is all about. Well, no, actually, functionalism doesn't really pay very much attention to what it's like to have an emotion or to have a feeling. Um, but it does give you that formal definition for these things because it looks at their role in the functional system. That's what defines what they are. So a functionalist is going to understand pain not in terms of it hurting subjectively, but in terms of it causing you to withdraw your hand from the thing that burned you or something, for example, right? That's what pain is for a functionalist. So it defines mental states in relation to all of the other mental states, and to behavioral outputs and inputs as well. What do you mean? How could it get fuzzy? Could you provide an example? Well, yeah, but there might still be different other behaviors associated with each of those different responses. Like one time when I was a kid, I burned myself really badly on a cigarette lighter, right? Um, Cars used to have cigarette lighters. So you've probably seen them, right? You'd push them in and then they pop back out again when they were ready, and you'd light your cigarette with it. So I was playing around in my parents' old van, and I pushed the cigarette lighter in, and it popped out immediately, like 2 seconds later. I was like, oh, there's no way it's hot already. It's only been a few seconds. So I put my thumb on it and I burned myself really badly. That thing got hot real fast. So I went like, ow, right? That's different than that time I touched something gross when I was cleaning the fridge out. I was cleaning my fridge out, get something weird on my hand, don't know what it is. Yeah, I withdraw my hand, but I go like, ew, instead of ow, right? So that behavioral output is part of what distinguishes pain and disgust. That's how we that's so things might seem to get fuzzy, but a functionalist would say we can always find the important differences that we need to distinguish mental states. So, what are some examples of multiple realizability? Can you think of some other examples of mental states defined in terms of functional roles? And can you see why, this is the really important one, can you see why functionalism is not reductive? I guess let's just focus on the last question. Why is functionalism non-reductive? Anybody want to venture a guess? Well, it's non-reductive because it doesn't make that strong identity claim. It doesn't say that being in pain is identical with a type of brain state. Yeah, exactly. Uh just like Ryan said here, yeah, and Daisy, I think you're on the right track as well. You're not reducing a mental state to a kind of brain state, but you're saying this mental state is what it is by virtue of the functional role it plays within the entire system. So it's a very holistic way of looking at a mind. It's not very reductionist. And if you're a functionalist and you're also a physicalist, then you probably subscribe to token identity theory. So here, we don't say that mental states are types of brain states. There are lots of different brain states which could realize a particular mental state. Remember, this is the idea of multiple realizability. So you would make a sort of weaker identity claim if you wanted to, where you could say that a particular mental state is identical with a token uh, type of token brain state. So let's try and come up with an example. I mean, let's use pain, right? So say I'm in pain. I stub my toe or I burn myself on a cigarette lighter. Um, and I'm in pain. My C fibers are firing. But again, because my nervous system is wired up differently than yours, it's just like how my face is different than yours, right? If we looked at our brains, if we could see what our brains look like side by side, both on a macroscopic and a microscopic scale, we would see that our brains are subtly different. But I wouldn't deny that you can experience pain just because your brain is different than mine. So maybe there is a general sort of type of brain state that is being in pain, but it's not like we all have that same type of brain state when we're in pain. Instead, we each have a token of that type. It's kind of like, let's say there's a, you know, saying that being in pain means that we all have the same type of mental state. The strong identity claim would be like saying if you and I both own a particular make and model of a car, um, that we would have the same car, literally the same car. But clearly we have different cars, right? Even if we have the same make and model, maybe my car is red and yours is blue. So we each have our own tokens of the same type of car. Likewise with brain states. And the same with animals. Animals, depending on your animal, you might have a very, very different brain and central nervous system. But if that animal is in pain, then we have the brain state is a token of a type of brain state. Maybe aliens have brains that are made of different materials altogether. Like, humans and dogs have pretty different brains, but our brains are made out of the same stuff. But maybe there are aliens who aren't carbon based. They could be silicon based life forms, and their brains are completely different. But their mental states, if they're identical with brain states, would still be uh, tokens, token states of a type of state called being in pain. Yeah. can make an analogy with the mind there. Some people don't take care of their minds either, right? Um, some people, well, they acquire some of those brain injuries, right? Um, and of course, some people put substances in their brains, which can cause damage, right? Um, it's like you can take your car for a joyride, but you might ruin the car if you take it for a joyride. Maybe you decide to go off-roading in your brand new car. Um, I actually saw a YouTube video like that recently. A fellow had his Ferrari and he was driving it around a cornfield. And Ferraris aren't really, I suppose, meant to drive through cornfields. Anyway, the car ended up catching fire and burning completely. Um, it's kind of like if you don't take care of your mind. If you party all the time, don't take care, don't eat well, don't sleep well, drink and do all kinds of drugs, you're going to end up with a little bit of brain damage, which is not good, right? So don't do that. um, an interesting consequence, though, of functionalism is that we could say that machines have mental states. Machines themselves might be said to think. This was the idea. I mean, Hilary Putnam was an American philosopher who developed the idea of machine functionalism. This is where functionalism comes from, the idea that what matters are the functional relations between the logical states of a machine, like a computer. It doesn't matter what the computer is made out of, right? Putnam formulated this by drawing on Alan Turing's notion of a Turing machine, which is like a universal digital computer. Yeah, this is also another way to unpack, another cool way to unpack the idea of multiple realizability, right? Let's say I want to make a calculator. So there are lots of different examples of calculators. I mean, if you were to use a calculator, what would you use? Say you had to do some math right now, what would you do? Yeah, you got a calculator on your phone. It's like a software calculator. And you probably got one on your computer as well, right? But that's not the only way you can have a calculator. You can have a pocket calculator. And that's kind of like the operations are like hardwired into it. So that's a different way to implement a calculator. So on your computer or your phone, you have really what is like a virtual version of a pocket calculator. And Dylan, great, that's where I was going next. Yeah, you don't even have to have a virtual or a pocket calculator made out of silicon chips and wires and solder and all that. You can have an abacus, and you could just be like moving those beads around, calculating that way. You can do the exact same mathematical operations on all of those devices, but they're all implemented differently. What matters, what makes it a calculator, according to functionalism, is that it calculates. The logical states of an abacus and a pocket calculator and any one of those things are what matter. It does not matter the physical implementation. What matters is what it does. Yeah, brains can calculate, sure, but brains are not really digital or analog. They're a little bit of both. Yeah, the first like proper calculators. Well, the first like mechanical calculator, I believe, was Babbage's difference engine, and that actually, even though it was mechanical, was digital. Analog means a continuous representation, and digital means discrete representation. So an abacus is technically digital, even though it's made of wood and stuff. It's still technically digital because it's like digital doesn't mean electronic, right? Digital means discrete, one step at a time using numbers. So abacuses are actually digital. So yeah, that's an interesting notion. Maybe if functionalism is right, we can say that machines can think. But that means that we could show functionalism is false by showing that machines can't think. And here's where we get to John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment. This is fun. Actually, I was just going through this in my other class. So this is the scenario. We've got a person sitting in a room, and that person doesn't understand any Chinese at all. Let's say it's Mandarin Chinese, just to keep things simple and straightforward. She can only understand English. And she's sitting in this room, and into the room are fed these pieces of paper, and they have sentences written in these Chinese characters on them. People outside of the room are passing these notes into the room, and they're all native speakers of Mandarin, right? So they can write down a message like, hello, how are you? And they'll write that in Chinese characters and send it into the room. Now, the person in the room, they don't understand Chinese, but they have a rule book that allows them to give the appropriate response by matching the symbols to the appropriate outputs. So they'll get their symbols and look up, okay, so if this set of symbols, which I have here, respond with this set of symbols. So you write those down, pass them to the people outside of the room. To the people outside the room, it seems like whatever's in the room can understand Chinese. But John Searle would say that the person in the room does not understand Chinese at all. They are just manipulating inputs and transforming them into outputs by following the rules, but they don't understand what the Chinese characters actually mean. So what Searle is trying to show here is that you can have syntactic symbol manipulation, manipulating the symbols in a rule-governed way, with no intelligence, no understanding of the semantics or the meaning of the symbols. So outside of the room, it would look like, to the speakers of Mandarin outside the room, it would look like whoever's in the room understands Chinese and can speak it fluently. But the person in the room is like, I don't know what any of these symbols mean. I'm just following the instructions in my rule book. So is everybody following that so far? Let us know in the chat if you get it. Okay. Yeah, Theo, you could. You could. I mean, we'll get there. I mean, there's a lot to be said about Searle's thought experiment here. I mean, he came up with it, what is it? Was it 1980? So 80s, 90s. Yeah, it was like 40 years ago. And this is still widely discussed. Still very important in classes like this, right? Is anyone not clear on what Searle is trying to say? Because it seems like people understand, but I just want to make sure before we proceed. Yeah, we could just say, for example, for argument's sake, the symbols perfectly match what's in the book. Because it's a thought experiment, right? Remember, thought experiments are about getting our intuitions pumping, about clarifying our fundamental concepts and our beliefs. So it doesn't matter that, nobody would build a Chinese room and put someone in it and see if it looked like they understood Chinese to the people outside of the room. Yeah, very good. This is kind of like how ChatGPT works. ChatGPT, though, is not following rules. like our person in the room is. What ChatGPT is doing is like a probabilistic sort of thing where it guesses based on the prompt you give it and everything it's ever read. It guesses what word is supposed to come next in its response. But I suspect Searle would say that, like the person in the Chinese room, ChatGPT doesn't know anything or understand anything. It's just a mechanism, right? It's dumb. It doesn't understand the meaning of what it's saying, right? Um, yeah, it's all syntax, no semantics, Searle would say. In fact, Searle would say that um, in computer programs, the meaning of the symbols is parasitic to those symbols rather than intrinsic. We, the programmers or the trainers, if we're talking machine learning instead of programming, we're the ones who assign meaning to the symbols and then get the computer to operate on the symbols in the way that we want it to. But the computer itself does not understand the meaning of the symbols like we do. So Searle would further say that the person in the room has no understanding of Chinese, even though she's successfully communicating with the people outside of the room. Computers are the same. They don't understand, they don't think, they aren't intelligent. So we could deny that they have mental states. And by the way, if Searle is right, then the Chinese room is also a powerful argument against the Turing test, which is an idea proposed by Alan Turing to answer the question, can machines think? And Turing is what he's doing here is operationalizing intelligence, which means we want to measure intelligence. We want to observe intelligence. But we can't really do that directly. I mean, how do you directly measure intelligence? You don't. You have to measure something else that is associated with intelligence. And in the case of the Turing test, it's verbal behavior. So what you do is you have a human interact with a computer and have a conversation with the computer. And if the computer can hold a conversation with the human, you have to grant that the computer is thinking, because the computer is doing something that we all agree thinking beings can do, and that is to express their thoughts with language. But what Searle says here is like, oh no, you could have a computer that does that, that performs well in terms of verbal behavior, and you could still deny that it thinks because the computer doesn't understand meaning. There's other criticisms of functionalism. Functionalism doesn't really explain qualia, right? That what it's like aspect of our experience of the world. Excuse me. Consider another thought experiment. This is from Ned Block. This is called the China brain thought experiment. I guess he picks China just because it has a big population. So imagine if we took like lots and lots of people, like the entire population of China, and it was like, so that's like over 1 billion people. And we have them simulate a brain so that every individual person is like an individual neuron and it can communicate with the other neurons in the brain, maybe via, I don't know, walkie-talkie or something, right? Now imagine that this giant simulated brain that's made up of the entire population of China is connected to a body. We could get the entire population of China to be functionally organized like a brain. But if we drop something on the toe of the body that the brain is connected to, would it be weird to say that the entire population feels pain? It seems kind of strange, right? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that if we had the entire population of China, or hey, the entire population of the Earth, all playing the role of neurons in the brain, and if it was connected to a body and we injured that body, would the Earth brain or the China brain feel pain? It seems kind of strange to suggest that it would, right? Oh, Brooke says, yeah, yeah, maybe it would. Okay. Again, it's another thought experiment, right? It trades on intuition. So, depending on what your intuitions about mental states and pain are, you might say, yeah, there's no problem with my China brain experiencing pain. Oh, look at that. I made a rhyme. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So some of you are like, "Hey, what's the problem?" And that's totally fine. Because yeah, the point is the citizens of China are supposed to be the neurons here. I guess what this is doing is like, look, when I feel pain, it's like, sure, I know I'm made out of billions and billions of cells, but it's me, the subject, who experiences pain. And in this thought experiment, where is our subject, right? We've got billions of little subjects acting as neurons, but where's that overall subject who experiences the pain? It's not there. And that's what this thought experiment kind of depends on. Yeah, kind of like, yeah, Jose, like that's what I mean right there. You're seeing them all as individual subjects. So yeah. Also, the inverted spectrum, right? Recall the inverted spectrum argument is the idea that maybe our visual spectrums are reversed. So my red is your green, right? So behaviorally, nothing would change if like person A and person B had inverted spectra compared to one another. So um, my red would look like your green, and my green would look like your red. But we'd still stop and go at the correct color of traffic lights and everything like that. I could still point to be like, look at that red apple over there. And you'd be like, yes, I see it. Of course, it would look red to me. To you, it would look like how I see green, but there would be no difference in terms of behavior or in terms of the functional role that these mental states would play. Yet there clearly would be a difference, right? And that's one way you can see how functionalism doesn't really deal with qualia very well. But of course, there's also eliminativism. So eliminativism, particularly eliminative materialism, is a type of physicalism that doesn't just reduce, it eliminates. It denies that our folk notions of mental states refer to real things. So beliefs and desires, for example, are not real, and they're not helpful when it comes to trying to explain the mind, right? We have this way of talking about mental states and using this sort of mental talk and thinking about other minds to explain the behavior of others. We call this folk psychology or common sense psychology, right? Like say your roommate leaves the house and they take their umbrella. Well, you reason on the basis of that behavior um, that your roommate believes it's going to rain later, right? So you infer a mental state from the behavior. That's a folk psychological sort of thing, right? But eliminative materialist says that, well, beliefs and desires are not, they're either not useful, they're unclear, or they don't refer to real things. So let's get rid of them. Folk psychology will not turn out to be a good scientific theory, right? As our understanding of the brain improves, we'll drop these folk psychological terms in favor of better theoretical terms. And we've done this in the sciences before, you know. We did not understand at one point what it was that separated the animate from the inanimate. That is, we didn't understand what made something alive. So we posited this élan vital, or vital force. Um, we no longer need this. Now we know how cell division works. We know about metabolism, DNA, protein folding, um, uh, reproduction, evolution. We don't need élan vital to explain life anymore. So we got rid of it. The luminiferous ether was used to explain how things like light or gravity propagate through space, as if it was some kind of medium that light propagated through, like waves in water. Well, it's not really like that. So we don't use this luminiferous ether anymore. Or phlogiston is one that you see a lot of in philosophy textbooks. Phlogiston was like a heat fluid that was imagined to explain how heat could transfer between objects. Like if I put my if I have like a wood stove or a fireplace and I put my cup of hot cocoa near the fire, well, the cocoa warms up. Why? The phlogiston is flowing from the fire to the cocoa. That's how we used to explain that. But of course, now we don't need phlogiston. We understand that heat, that temperature is the mean kinetic energy of molecules. By putting my hot cocoa near the fire, it becomes hotter still, because the mean kinetic energy of the air molecules around the fire are causing the hot cocoa molecules to move around a lot as well. And that makes it warmer, right? No phlogiston needed. Maybe not. You could be right. Maybe we're not at the point where we can do this. But eliminativists like Paul and Patricia Churchland say that even if we're not there yet, we will be one day. Although I agree, if eliminativism is the right option, we're still a ways away from being able to fully eliminate all of our mental talk. And even if we could, would we want to? Like, it wouldn't it be weird to like hey, do you remember where my phone is? That's a question my partner asks me all the time. Hey, do you know where my phone is? Do you remember where I left it? I think I remember it being on the kitchen counter, right? Um, that's a mental state, right? So even if it's really all just neurons, wouldn't it be weird to be like in our everyday lives, like, hey, where's my phone? I have a neural representation of your phone on the kitchen counter. Um, yeah, my neurons are firing such that that's where the phone is, according to my memory banks. Like what? No, that's just not how we talk about things, right? Some higher level concepts are useful. You know, this desk is I could reduce this desk to the atoms it's made of. But is that useful? I still need to talk about desks and chairs, not collections of atoms, right? Maybe even if we can reduce everything, all mental states to physical states, we don't want to eliminate uh the mental states or the talk of mental states. Yeah, I think Zenon Polishin had a really funny example of, like, imagine you're an eliminative materialist and you want to recruit people for your scientific study. You still have to rely on mentalistic talk, because if you're going to recruit people, you have to put up a poster and, maybe your recruitment poster is like, want to earn $10? Then come participate in this experiment, right? So even though you don't believe in mental talk, you still rely on it. Like, oh, hey, I'm playing on these people's desires. Students don't have a lot of money. Maybe they'd like to earn some extra money by volunteering to be an experimental participant. So you're appealing to a desire there, right? Um, so that's just something to think about. Okay, I think we have time to finish with behaviorism. So behaviorism is another idea which can be eliminativist or reductivist. It's the idea that learning is the product of conditioning. Um, so all behavior is learned via conditioning, which is a matter of stimulus and response. And we don't need mental states to explain behavior. We focus on the behavior and we don't worry about mental states. So reductive behaviorism, or logical behaviorism, if you like, says that the causes of behaviors are really just our environmental stimuli. And we can still talk about mental states, but when we do, what we're actually doing is using them as a sort of shorthand for behavioral dispositions. So we're just in the way that certain forms of identity theory reduce mental states to physical states. Here we reduce mental states to behavioral dispositions. But then there's eliminative behaviorism. This is also sometimes called ontological behaviorism, and here's where we just outright reject the mental. This was championed by famous behaviorist psychologists like Watson and Skinner. Both behaviorists and eliminativists say that mental talk is not explanatory. It doesn't play the explanatory role that we want it to. It doesn't make a good scientific theory. But behaviorism has faced some serious challenges. It was really big in the early 20th century, but eventually came to be replaced by cognitive psychology. One reason was because behaviorists, even the eliminativist behaviorists, couldn't get away from mental talk. Behaviorism also has a lot of difficulty explaining novel behavior, right? If behavior is the product of conditioning, which is stimuli and response, association and reinforcement, then how is it that I'm able to do something new? How is it that I'm able to do something that I haven't been conditioned for, right? Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, was also very heavily criticized by Noam Chomsky, who argued that Noam Chomsky was a linguist. He's still around. He's probably one of the only living members of the so-called cognitive revolution who's still with us. But Chomsky pointed out that there's just not enough time for children to learn language at the speed that they do if learning is just the product of conditioning. Right? If learning something like a language was the result of conditioning, it would take way longer for kids to learn languages. But kids learn languages so fast. It's crazy. Why? Well, some of it must be innate. So it's not learned via conditioning. Rather, universal grammar is innate. The sort of rule governed, the rules of language are something that we're born with, Chomsky says. Also, in the 60s and 70s, we had the mental imagery debate. So we actually worked out a way by doing mental rotation studies to look at what was going on in here, which behaviorists said, don't worry about that. That's not going to explain anything. Even it was behaviorists themselves who first had to appeal to mental states. There was a scientist named Edward Tolman who studied how rats learn to run mazes. And he had this one group of rats that just wandered the maze aimlessly. And he didn't give them any treats or anything when they finished, no rewards. But one day after they had been wandering the maze for a few days, Tolman started giving the rats rewards, and he determined that they had actually been learning the layout of the maze while they were aimlessly wandering. They were learning without reinforcement. And they seem to have a kind of cognitive map of the maze, a mental representation of the maze, which is something that a behaviorist would be like, that doesn't explain anything. Don't worry about mental representations, right? So their behaviorism's downfall came from without and from within. But yeah, it doesn't really explain children's development. In fact, Watson conducted a pretty messed up experiment called the Little Albert experiment, where um, he made this infant afraid of things that were cuddly, like cute bunny rabbits and stuff, just as a result of conditioning. I don't know what happened to Albert, but I think he experienced some psychological difficulties later in life. But this was the idea, like, oh, if you just give me 10 kids, and BF Skinner and Watson too writes, give me 10 children and I'll turn one of them into a doctor and one of them into an artist and one into this and one into that, just because I'll condition them the right kind of way. Of course, it doesn't really work that way, right? Anyway, that's behaviorism. Now, Crumley rounds out this chapter by telling us what a belief is on each of these accounts of the mental. We don't have time for that today. It's time to wrap up class. But I do encourage you to reread that section following this lecture, just so that you can come to grips with some of the differences between all of these different theories. And the differences are pretty subtle in some cases. So that's it for today. Next time, we're going to look at chapter 9. So that's personal identity. So please read chapter 9 for next week, and we'll talk about personal identity. And we'll have a few more fun thought experiments probably as well. So thanks, everyone, for joining in today. And I'll see you all next week. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week, and take care.